Finding Zasha, Chapter 25. I knew things were getting worse very quickly when I was stopped 3 times by German soldiers on my way back to their headquarters. Each time I showed my letter, and each time I saw the same reaction of surprise and fear. When I arrived, Axel was alone, seated at the desk, looking at a small pile of photographs. "You're late," he said without looking up. "Yes, sir. I would have been on time, but the soldiers kept stopping me." He smiled at me. "That's why we'll win the war, my little friend. We plan ahead." Then his smile twisted into something malevolent. He pounded his fist on the table, hitting it once, with every word as he yelled, "You are never to be late again." It was like being blown over by a sudden foul wind. "Yes, sir," I mumbled. "Sorry, sir." I was already so upset from seeing Yeshka hit for no reason by the Nazi and poor Polina's beaten face. It was all I could do to remain calm and normal looking. I began to take my concertina out of its case. "Is there anything special you'd like to—" "No, no music now." "Yes, sir," I responded, packing it back up. I looked around uneasily. What was I supposed to do? If you don't mind me asking, how did the first lesson go with the dogs and the trainer?" "I don't know. They haven't returned yet." I stood in silence for another minute, until I remembered that the room I slept in with the dogs could use some cleaning. "I was wondering, sir, if—" A scream came from just outside the window, a terrible cry of pain. "What's that?" Axel was studying a photograph, carefully holding it just a foot from his face. "What's what?" He looked up as if you were just hearing it. "Oh, that. A man is being punished for disobeying an order I gave him. Ivan, come here. Look at these pictures. They're of Thor and Zasha's parents." I approached him reluctantly as I caught my first glimpse of a photograph of a beautiful, full-grown German shepherd. Another scream pierced the air. I jumped back. "What are they doing to him?" "Go look," he answered nonchalantly, picking up another photo. I shook my head. I almost couldn't stop shaking it. "I insist." He fixed me with a hard stare. "Yes, sir." Slowly I eased toward the large window. It looked out onto a street where 2 sawhorses had been set up at the curb with a board laid between them, forming a crude table. On the table, stretched out in his stomach, hands above his head, was a German soldier. Another soldier held his ankles, and another held his wrists. A third man, large and stocky, held a whip. Just as I realized what was happening, the man with the whip raised it high and brought it down with all his might on the back of the man's legs. That scream was worse yet. I gasped loudly. Alex laughed. "Do you see the men watching the punishment?" I'd barely noticed that 20 or so men were gathered in the back of the man with the whip, watching the proceedings. "Yes." I could barely get the word out. "They'll remember it, just like you. And when they think of disobeying me or doing something they shouldn't, they'll remember that man and what he sounded like. You won't forget him, will you, Ivan?" Before I could answer, the man screamed again and cried out for them to stop. Tears formed in my eyes. Rage filled my heart. "Never," I choked out. "They will continue until I tell them to stop. But a half a dozen lashes is usually enough." He stood in front of the window and watched dispassionately as the man received 2 more ferocious strokes of the whip. I trembled as I stood next to him, forcing myself to keep my eyes open so he wouldn't use that as an excuse to prolong the man's misery. He knocked hard on the glass with his knuckles. The man with the whip looked up, and Axel nodded. I must have been holding my breath because a gush of air rushed from my lungs when I realized it was over. Just as my body relaxed and I turned away from the window, there was another nerve-shattering cry from the poor man below. A garbled noise escaped me. Axel barked out another horrible laugh and slapped his thigh. "That's the one I enjoy the most, the one he isn't expecting, the one that comes after he thinks it's over." He sighed happily. "Come here, Ivan. Look at the pictures with me." Oh, I stood up straight, filled with hatred for this cruel man, closed my eyes and refused to let him see how repugnant he was to me. Breathing deeply, I leaned over the table and said, "Show me, please, sir." He spread the dozen or so pictures out and pointed to one of the 2 adult German shepherds. "These are Thor's parents, Bruno and Freya." Sorry. "Beautiful," I murmured, glancing at Axel, hoping I looked like I had already forgotten about the man outside. "Thor will be a champion. I know it. Bruno is known for strength and speed. Freya for her cunning. Thor will be superior in every way." He looked at me and smiled brightly, like all of us Germans. I hoped my forced smile let him think that I agreed with his absurd and grandiose claim. "And here," he pointed to another photo, "are Zasha's parents, Konrad and Goethe. They're both known for their good dispositions." "Zasha does seem very sweet." The door burst open, and Thor and Zasha ran in looking like they were being chased by the devil himself. They scurried around the room as though looking for a hiding place. They found one behind a tall wooden storage cabinet. Striding in after them was an athletic man, one who looked like he spent most of his time outdoors hunting and fishing. He was dressed in an officer's uniform, his broad shoulders straining the seams of the jacket, and his pants tucked neatly into his tall boots. He carried a thin, flexible training stick in his hand. I loathed him on sight. That means hated him. Axel stood up, smiled, and conversed with him in German. He even tried to coax Zasha and Thor out of their hiding places, getting down on his knees and reaching under the cabinet. The dogs pressed their little backs hard against the wall, lifting up their paws repeatedly as Axel tried to grab hold of them. I eyed the other man, and he caught me. He yelled at me in German. My hands went up defensively, and I said Russian, in German, one of the few words I knew. His eyes narrowed. Then he turned away just in time to see Axel dragging poor Thor out from his hiding place. He whimpered and struggled to get away. Axel's tone with him was friendly and kind, but Thor seemed terrified. "May I help, sir?" I asked. "No," he snapped. "They're being trained." After a few exchanges in German between the men, the trainer walked over to the cabinet with some effort, managed to move it far enough away from the wall to grab Zasha. She squealed and writhed, trying to escape his grasp, but he held tight. Oh, how I wished I could understand the conversation that went on between the two men. I hated both of them for the way they were handling the dogs, as if they were things, possessions, soulless creatures to be molded into slaves, robots, performing clowns. They let the dogs back on the floor. To my joy and horror, they ran to me. Zasha standing on her hind legs, begging me to pick her up. Thor trying to make himself invisible behind my legs. I stood as still as possible with my hands pressed against my legs. I didn't dare move toward either dog, although I so desperately wanted to. The men stared at us, Axel with a frown, the trainer with disdain and arrogance. He pulled a lead, out of his pocket, and without a word attached it to Zasha's collar and took her from me. She cried and turned her head back toward me, looking frantic. I wanted to snatch her away and run for the door, but I could do nothing. I tried to comfort Thor by mumbling soothing things to him, never taking my eyes off the trainer. He led Zasha around the large room in a circle while talking to Axel, as if explaining something to him. She kept turning around to find me and Thor. Every time she did, the trainer yanked her head back to her poor little neck. It's a miracle he didn't snap it. I swallowed my anger and helplessness for Zasha. The trainer stopped suddenly, pulling Zasha back, as if she, too, should have known to stop, then tapped her rear end hard with the training stick. She yelped and trembled. If this horrible pantomime went on much longer, I don't know how I was going to stop myself from running over and wresting the stick from his hands and using it on him. I knew Thor would be next. As a male, there was a chance he would respond to the whip hand with a bite. What terrible consequences that would bring, I couldn't imagine. What can I do? What can I do? My mind screamed again and again. There was a knock at the door. "What?" Axel said impatiently. A young soldier entered, a letter in his hand. Axel took it, frowned, and then handed it to the trainer. Within seconds, his face grew pale, his expression pained. He dropped Zasha's lead, and she ran over to be with me and Thor. He was soon in an animated discussion with Axel. Finally, they saluted each other, and Axel patted him on the back sympathetically just before he rushed out of the room. I felt Thor's body relax and Zasha's breathing come calmer after the instant he was gone. Axel sighed loudly, his exasperation clear. His son was wounded, he said, as if to himself, but it was also meant for me. So what? Thousands of men have been wounded, and their daddies don't go running off to put bandages on them. We've captured Stalin's own son, and do you know what Stalin did? He looked at me as if expecting an answer. No, sir. I didn't even know his son had been taken prisoner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He closed his eyes and shook his head in frustration. And now I have 2 puppies who must be trained and a trainer who's too busy being a nursemaid to do his job? He was practically yelling by the end of his sentence. I didn't say a word. The next move had to come from Axel. If he didn't remember that I claimed to know how to train dogs, surely he would notice how they'd run to me for protection, how even now they crouched next to me on the floor. He sat down and then immediately pushed his chair back noisily from his desk. "We're going for a walk. Bring the dogs." I slipped on my coat, attached Thor's lead, grabbed Zasha's, and ran into the hall after him with the dogs close at heel. The 2 guards outside of his door looked momentarily surprised and confused, but sprang into action, one taking his place in front of Axel and the other in back of me. "You've got to show him, Ivan," I said to myself. "Show him what you can do with these dogs. This is your chance. If he won't trust you with the dogs now, you'll never be able to save them from the terrible future he has planned for them." Oh, jeez. Chapter 26. Take Thor off his lead, Axel commanded as soon as we were outside. With all the activity surrounding the building, I thought it was a terrible idea, a dangerous one for Thor, but we were all under his power, and so I did as I was told. Let's run, he said to Thor, and set off down the sidewalk, looking over his shoulder several times to see if Thor was following him. He wasn't. He was too excited by the new environment to do anything but sniff and mark his territory. One of the guards said something to Axel that he answered in a sharp, dismissive way. I got the feeling Axel was making their job of guarding him much harder. The curious stares of several soldiers who were outside shoveling snow and tending vehicles confirmed this for me. Axel bent down and called, Here, Thor, here, boy. This time the puppy ran to him. I was relieved. I didn't trust Axel not to hurt the dogs if they did something to displease him. Take off Zasha's lead. Call her, and see if she'll come to you. I did as Axel requested. Zasha immediately stood on her hind legs and put her front paws on my leg, begging me to pick her up. I brushed them off gently and ran about 20 feet before turning around and calling, Here, Zasha. But there was no need. She was at my feet, having followed me from the moment I ran from her. Axel noticed. She likes you. Don't forget what I said. You are not their master. Yes, sir. I think she followed me because she's cold, that's all. She's about to get a lot colder. We need to start their conditioning, make them stronger, tougher. He ran ahead of me, Thor following in his footsteps. I'm not sure I understand, I cried as I rushed after them, making sure Zasha was at my heels. You told me you and your friend went sledding somewhere near here. Did I? I answered weakly. Show me that place. It will do them good to climb up and down a hill. My mind was screaming inside of me. No, don't take him there. Don't take him anywhere near Petra's house or the tunnels. What I said was, we don't have a sled. Well, you're not going to be sledding, you idiot. These are dogs. You're going to lead us to that area. We'd already left the main square behind, and we were half walking, half running in the direction of the forest to the south. This was terrible. Petra, Yeshka, and Joseph were all at Petra's cabin. Polina had called it a safe house. For all I knew, other partisans were there too. It's quite a distance from here, I said, maybe too far for puppies. I started to pick up Zasha, but Axel snapped. No, just as my finger touched her fur. That's the whole point, to make them strong, muscular, hardened to the elements. Yes, sir. We walked in silence for the next few minutes. I tried to walk at a pace that wouldn't be too hard on the dogs. They were already showing signs of tiring with the effort of walking in the snow. Axel either didn't notice or didn't care. Tell me, Ivan, how would you begin their training? Surprise and fear hit me simultaneously. If Axel knew I had only taught some simple tricks to dogs in our apartment building and was unqualified in any other way, I dreaded what he might do. I regained my footing by reminding myself I was a performer, only now without an instrument in my hands, and assumed an attitude of confidence and knowledge. Well, sir, training a dog is like building a wall. You do it methodically, brick by brick. Training is serious business. Routine is most important. I think you made a wise decision in creating their own quiet room for them. He looked pleased to hear his wisdom praised. May I say something else, sir? If it's reasonably intelligent. I breathed deeply as I prepared to deceive him. You may remember that I have trained many dogs, and in my opinion, the trainer I saw today was doing everything wrong. Oh, really? His sarcasm wasn't followed by an order to stop talking, so I rushed on. Yes, that kind of cruelty will only hurt and confuse them. They may obey under the threat of pain, but they will never be loyal, never love you. They may even try their best to get away from you. He stiffened and said curtly, I've always had kennelmen train my dogs. I never inquired about their methods as long as they did their job. I think I could train them and quickly if you'd give me that opportunity. I'm already sleeping in their quarters. I'll feed them, walk them, clean up their messes, train them. You'll see them every day, but with none of the unpleasantness animals can bring with them. So, he sort of laughed, you will be the nanny. They will be the children. You will bring them to their father for his pleasure, clean, feed, and well behaved. When I am done, you will take them back to the nursery like good children. Possible. Then the harsh, threatening tone returned as strong as ever, but only for a short time. When they are fully trained, they will stay with me. That's when I will introduce them to the combat specialist, who, of course, will turn them into proper German soldiers. Of course, sir, I answered deferentially, but suddenly knowing that no matter what, I was going to rescue those dogs, whether Petra would help me out or not. We marched on for another 15 minutes until we reached the place where Polina and I had gone sledding. Beautiful, Axel exclaimed as he stood at the top of the hill. And look, a little stream, perfect. The bodyguards looked less than charmed and never stopped scrutinizing the landscape as if expecting to see sharpshooters in the trees. Thor and I will race you and Zasha to the stream. Go! Axel skillfully managed the first step, 15 feet of the hill, without falling. Thor rolled and ran and rolled some more, but seemed to relish the adventure. One of the guards muttered something under his breath that I knew was a complaint about Axel. I pretended I didn't hear it. Zasha huddled next to me, shivering. I'm sorry, girl. We've got to do it. Come on. I carefully maneuvered down the first 5 feet or so of the hill and waited for her to follow. She looked too each side of her, obviously reluctant to join in our supposed adventure. Please, girl, don't give him an excuse to hurt us. Zasha took a tentative step, and once she made it down to where I stood, we were able to get down the long slope without a problem. Both bodyguards followed, muttering what I think would be understood as curse words in any language. Thor looked like he was enjoying himself. He was curious about the stream, running alongside it, stopping to smell it here and there, twice skittering out onto the ice. It appeared to be frozen in the most places, but not all. There were darker patches near the middle where it still ran. I worried that Thor would fall through the ice if he wasn't careful, but something else was bothering me more. Thor was heading in the direction of Petra's cottage. "Wait up, Thor," Axel cried with a laugh, running after him. "Ivan, hurry." I waved to let him know I understood. Thor ran farther and farther west towards Petra's, with Axel not far behind. I racked my brain for some way of bringing them back toward us. I thought of pretending I'd sprained my ankle, but Axel wouldn't care. Nothing was going to interfere with his fun. I picked up a handful of snow, thinking I'd lob a snowball at Thor and make him remember me and Zasha and want to play with us, but he was too far away now, and if I hit Axel by accident, I'd be in serious trouble. "Will you hurry up?" Axel yelled. We ran as well as we could in the snow. I was breathless by the time I reached his side. "Maybe we should turn back, sir. The dogs are still so young." "Nonsense. Look at Thor. As curious as a cat. Strong as a tiger." He looked at Zasha and whisked her off the ground almost before I knew what he was doing. "And you, my pretty, what are you made of?" He tossed her in the snow in front of him and began to chase her. I followed them. Her instincts took over and she ran. At first she followed the same path as Thor, but as we came within 20 yards of where the stream angled to the south, she charged over it. Axel stopped. "Go get her." "Zasha, no!" I ran after her, jumping easily across the 3-foot-wide stream. Now she seemed like she thought it was a game and ran in an arc back toward the creek, but not so close that I could catch her. She made it easily across the ice, closer now to where the stream turned south. It was wider there, the jump more difficult. I didn't trust the ice to hold my weight. "Zasha, please," I called, dropping to my knee and extending my open arms to her. But my pleas meant nothing compared to the fun she was having running back and forth, and she paid no attention to me. "Get control of that dog," Axel yelled at me. Zasha made another run across the creek. I rushed after her. This time the water was too wide to jump. The ice must have been as thin as a frost covering because it cracked almost immediately when Zasha's paws touched it. She looked shocked and struggled to get her balance, to get back on top of the ice and out of the water that was quickly engulfing her. She cried out in fear, "Zasha!" I slammed my feet down through the ice, cold water, until I reached her. The stream was about just 8 or 10 inches deep. I was protected by my galoshes, but Zasha was already soaked up to her neck. She lashed out with her front paws, reaching for the bank, succeeding only in splashing freezing water in her face and head. I grabbed her by the sides, lifting her up out of the water as I stepped back on solid ground. She was soaked. There was no way I could set her down in the snow. "Look what you've done," Axel scolded me as he reached us. "If anything happens to that dog, you will pay dearly." I held her at arm's length as the water dripped onto the ground and she tried to shake it from her. "I'm so sorry." And then I did the only thing I could think of. I unbuttoned my coat, held her cold, wet body against my warm chest, and buttoned my coat back up. Within seconds, it felt like it was me who'd fallen through the ice. Axel was furious. I think if Zasha hadn't been so close to my face, he would have hit me. Instead, he shoved me with broad hands that felt like bricks against both my shoulders. I cried out as I fell down in the snow. Pain shut up my back as I landed, but I managed to hold on to Zasha and keep her safe in my coat. "Good. I hope it hurts. It's going to hurt a lot more if that dog catches a cold. And if she dies from that cold," his face was distorted with rage. "Take her back now. And if you think your stupidity is going to ruin Thor's exercise, you are mistaken." "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry." "Sorry," he spat. "Get out of my sight." I struggled to get up and headed back the hill as fast as I could. The only good thing about Zasha's accident was that it kept Axel from continuing in the direction of Petra's house. But if Zasha wasn't dried and warm soon, she would catch a cold or even pneumonia. My life wouldn't be worth much. If that happened, there was only one way we'd both have a fighting chance. We'd have to stop at Galina's, dry Zasha, and change my clothes. If it was done quickly and we made it back to headquarters before Axel arrived, he probably wouldn't punish me for doing it without his permission. Remembering the whipping of the man outside his window, I prayed he wouldn't. I unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of my coat just enough so that Zasha could see where she was and what was going on around her. She squirmed and repositioned herself. I held the bottom of my coat tightly against her so she wouldn't fall to the ground. "I'm sorry, girl. You'll be warm soon, I promise." She trembled but made no sound. We were on flat ground now. I trudged through the foot-high powdery snow as quickly as I was able. My chest felt bitterly cold, and the water had dripped down into my pants even, making every part of me ice cold except my feet. Between Sasha's weight, the cold, the wetness, and keeping her from falling out of my coat and into the snow, my shoulders became more hunched, my posture worse, my walk stiff and awkward. I kept my focus on putting one foot in front of the other, head down, knowing that just a little farther there was help and warmth for us both. Maybe that's why it took me a moment to realize someone was calling, "Ivan, Ivan." I wanted to cry with relief when I saw it was Auntie rushing toward me with Galena not far behind. Neither of them had coats or hats on. They must have seen me from the window and realized something was wrong. What happened? Auntie cried as she neared me. Then I heard her gasp. She must have seen Zasha. We're wet, Auntie, and very cold. Help us get to the house. Until I saw her and Galena, I hadn't realized how desperate I felt. Auntie was at my side, slipping her arm around me, bustling me toward the house. Galena supported my other arm. After a squeal of joy when she saw Zasha's head peeping out from my coat. Where's Major Wright? Auntie asked quietly as we started up the back steps. Does he know about this? There was an edge of fear in her voice. Yes, but he doesn't know I'm here. We have to hurry. Hurry, Auntie. Close the door behind us, but not without backwards glances to make sure no one was following or had seen us. Wow, that was a tough one. I'm looking forward to reading more with you and definitely talking about this. I wonder what's going to happen in chapter 27.